Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. Welcome back to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. If this is your first episode, welcome. So glad you're here. And for those that have been listening for a while, thank you so much. It's so wonderful to have you. Today, you'll be hearing the second part of my interview with wine writer and expert Natalie MacLean. Now, if this is your first episode and you haven't heard part one, I highly recommend pausing this one and going back to listen to episode 88 first. You don't have to. You can listen in whatever order you want, but it might work out a little better. In this episode, we'll discuss what a healthy relationship with wine looks like and whether misogyny in the wine world has improved, along with what advice Natalie has for women getting into the world of wine. Let's get into the interview. Okay, before we do more into the memoir, because I'm very excited to talk more into that, can you tell us about your two other books that you've written real quick?
Sure. So they are a day in the life of approach. So the first one is Red, White, and Drunk All Over, a tipsy journey from grape to glass. And then the second one was Unquenchable, I get all these words mixed up. The subtitle of the first one was A Wine-Soaked Journey from Grape to Glass. Unquenchable, a tipsy search for the world's best bargain bottles. Bit of a theme, but it's, again, going back to the Kermit Lynch model. It's doing and storytelling rather than just interviewing or observing. So I worked at a fancy French restaurant for several nights as a sommelier with a tuxedo and everything, shadowing the real sommelier to talk about what is good wine service. How do you choose from a restaurant wine list, especially a big one? How do you pair wine with food? What should the sommelier be doing? How much should you tip? Is it different for when you have an expensive bottle? All kinds of issues come up. But instead of just giving you a prescription for that, I use the color of being there. And I'm always sort of taking pot shots at myself, humor-wise, in terms of the silly things I do and say. And it has a lot more color. I worked in several wine shops, one in California, another in New York, to talk about how to buy wine. So I'm helping different customers with different problems or challenges, dinner parties, whatever. I love Cheetos. What's the pairing? To talk about that aspect. And as I mentioned, I worked the harvest in California. So it's all of that. And then there's just other things I do. Like I went over to South Africa and I went shark diving with a winemaker. We're in cages, great white sharks off the coast.
Were you expecting that? Was that like on the agenda, or did that just kind of come out of nowhere?
Yeah, I actually run toward the fire. So when I set up interviews, I want to do something unusual with people that is already a passion for them. He was a diver and he had done this a lot in addition to making wine. So I'm trying to get at people's other passions, but also do it with them rather than just sit back and interview with them. It comes from that, they call it the new school of journalism, but it dates back to the 60s. George Plimpton played in the NFL, even though he really wasn't a football player, to write about it. Joan Didion and Gay Talese and the guy who wrote In Cold Blood, I can't remember right now. So it's the do, don't observe, don't just observe. So these things lend themselves to more color, more emotion. Again, you're trying to incorporate the emotion and the humor, tie into that limbic system that will remember, because it's also the seat of our memories. If you want to remember all that info, you got to wrap it all around the storytelling, the emotion, the humor, everything else.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I will have links in the show notes for folks listening to all of the books, so you can go check them out. I'm sure they're also readily available on Amazon. It might even find them in your local bookstore as well. So just keep an eye out for those. Just a quick reminder, if you are not on my mailing list yet, what are you waiting for? I would love for you to join. When you do, you'll get a free shopping guide that has 15 of my favorite wines under $15. Head to corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and there'll be a little section where you can join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter filled with wine tips, recommendations, special offers, and so much more. Now, let's get back to the show. Okay, now I do want to get into, the drinking part of wine, because I think it's really interesting. It really caught my eye when I was reading, because I always make the joke that, I love wine, and like the downside is that it has alcohol. Like if only it could taste this good and didn't have alcohol, kind of like sugary foods, right? You're like, it just tastes good, but like I'm not doing it because I want the sugar. Like I just want it because it's good.
We're wired. It's dopamine, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
reward hit.
You feel good.
Yeah.
But I really like that you don't shy away from the fact that, like, not only does wine just taste good, it has this emotional piece, it has this story behind it, but the alcohol is also a reason to appreciate it. That, like, we might not like wine in the same way if it didn't have alcohol, because it, like you said, it changes your mind, and it does things to your system. And I think that was just really interesting to read someone actually talking about that and admitting that, like, I did like the buzz too. Like it wasn't just the wine. And so, do you think other wine professionals think this way and just don't talk about it? Or why is it not a thing that's talked about as much in the wine world?
It might be tied into that bit that we talked about earlier, that to be professional, you have to be serious. So you're not going to admit to any buzz or frivolity or feeling a little tipsy. So I think it is unusual for a lot of wine critics, and they might view that, admitting to that, as unprofessional, and that's fine. They can have their own opinion on that. But for me, if I'm talking about the human experience of wine, it's not just because it smells like violets and oak and a vanilla spice. It's because it's also, as you say, changing our mind states. Michael Pollan, who wrote The Omnivore's Dilemma, great book, also wrote about our brains on LSD, changing your world by changing your mind state. I think that's another reason why wine appeals to me rather than food, and why I didn't become a food writer, even though I do wine and food pairings, because you've got all this sensory pleasure, and it's a drug,
Yeah.
or toxin, if you want to call it. But in moderation, I do think it can be part of a healthy lifestyle. And it gives you a wider window, I think, on your life. And for those of us, again, who tend to be A-type, or any personality, a nice glass of wine can drop you nicely into the moment and expand your horizon, let your shoulders down. And I'm not advocating it as a way to self-medicate to relax. You need to find other ways to do that. And that's part of my struggle in the book that I talk about, and the techniques that I found to do that without wine. But wine does have that quality. I think it's a topic that we don't talk about much in our industry, because drinking, or tasting, I should say, is viewed as an occupational duty, and there's shame in admitting any sort of problem. If you're not drinking wine, at least as a woman, even outside the wine industry, people say, are you pregnant? Or is it a religious reason? Or do you have a problem? It's like there's just, people all kind of jump to that often if you're not having a glass of wine. But the U.S. Department of Health and Services statistics say that the hospitality industry, which includes wineries and restaurants, has the highest rate of substance abuse of any profession. We have easy access to alcohol, and it's very easy to lean on it as a crutch, which I did during my no good, terrible, very bad vintage, personally and professionally. It was right there.
Yeah.
Even though I've been writing about wine for 14 years up until then with no issue. So I
Yeah.
do think there's some things going on.
I think to me, there's this feeling around it where it's like all or nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And that was something that I really enjoyed reading in your book, where you're like, I think I have a problem with this. Do I need to quit it completely?
Mm.
And it was like, but it's my life, and that's something that I've always had. I have in my family, there is some alcohol abuse in my extended family. And they do have proof that that is somewhat, if your family has it, you could develop it. And so it's something that's always on my mind of like thinking about it. But I think that's what's important is you're thinking about it is one piece of it. But I also think this is such an interesting time when I don't think people are drinking as much. I mean, people are
Oh,
either choosing to not drink at all, they're choosing THC or CBD products over alcohol. And I think it's like a pull away from this mom juice or like the thing that I need to relax, which I am against that. I don't love that idea.
yeah,
And you called it out too of like, you shouldn't drink because you need it. Like mommy needs her wine tonight, like
mommy's little helper.
yeah,
Yeah, I used to be
exactly.
team captain on all those LOL memes, but it's like, but there's a serious underlying issue there that's kind of like a thanklessness of no one's going to help mom, so mom's going to help herself to another drink and then
Oh, that's
another.
such a great way to
So
look at it too, right? It's not just this like mom's, and all like the glittery shirts or all the, the this and loving wine. But it's a good call out. How do you think people can have this healthy relationship with wine, keeping all of these things in mind? This podcast is sponsored by VoChill. When you're enjoying a glass of wine, temperature matters. And you don't need to be a wine expert to know this. You know this the minute you realize you forgot to put the bottle of wine in the fridge, and now you're stuck with lukewarm Sauvignon Blanc that is the opposite of refreshing. You know adding ice cubes will just water the wine down, but it seems like it's your only option. Not anymore. I want to introduce you to one of my favorite wine gadgets, VoChill. This gadget is as simple as it is elegant. It will keep wine perfectly chilled in your own wine glass. No more clunky metal or plastic tumblers or ice in your wine. While this gadget is an absolute must during the summer months, I don't enjoy wine without it from June to September. It's also incredibly useful for those days when you're craving a glass of white or rosé, but you don't want to wait for the bottle to chill in the fridge. VoChill offers a stemmed and stemless chiller in multiple colors, so you're bound to find one that's perfect for you. They also make the perfect gift. I should know, I got one for my mom at Christmas a couple years ago, and she loves it. Head to vochill.com, that's VOCHILL.com, to get your perfect wine chiller, and don't forget to use code CORKANDFIZZ for 15% off your order. This podcast is sponsored by the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Club. Interested in trying new wines, but not sure where to start? Or maybe you've been listening to this podcast for a while and you love the idea of tasting wine live with me. If that's you, come join my Cork Crew Virtual Wine Club, and you'll get to sip wine with me twice a month while I help you find new favorite wines. The Cork Crew is not your ordinary wine club. This is a community of people who are passionate about exploring new flavors, learning about different wine styles, and having fun along the way. And the best part about this club, purchasing the wine is completely optional. Plus, all events are recorded, and you have access to the full library of recordings as a Cork Crew member, so you can always catch up if you can't make it live. Oh, and did I mention it's virtual, which means you get to do all of this from the comfort of your sofa in your PJs. No need to worry about driving in crappy traffic, finding a designated driver, or spending an arm and a leg on a taxi. Want to give it a try without the commitment? You're in luck. Right now, I'm offering a free class pass to anybody who wants to try out the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Tasting Club. With this pass, you'll be able to join a Cork Crew event of your choosing. No strings attached. I don't need your credit card. I don't need you to sign up for anything. You'll be my guest. Simply head to corkandfizz.com/free class pass to get your class pass and be one step closer to becoming a member of the best wine tasting club around, the Cork Crew. I can't wait to see you there. Now let's get back to the show.
sure. So I think it is a personal decision. Now, first, we can look at the health guidelines, which do differ by country. And as I understand it, the US might be revising their health guidelines next year. In Canada, it remains 2 glasses a day for women, 3 for men, no more than 14 a week or 21. Now, there's been lots of scary headlines that have come out with 0 alcohol or 2 drinks a week max. But the studies have been problematic. And of course, I'm biased. This is what I do, but I read them all. And I've interviewed lots of doctors and health experts. And so I've come to the personal conclusion that wine in moderation can be part of a joyous, healthy lifestyle. And so except of course, if you have certain medical conditions, if you're pregnant, et cetera, et cetera. For me, because people ask, so what does that mean for you? I have come to the point in my life where I do not have wine 4 nights a week. I do have wine the other three. And it's because I'm either going out to a restaurant or we're cooking here at home, like on a Saturday night. And I will do the half bottle thing, which is approximately 2.5 glasses, but it's probably closer to 3, depending on the alcohol level, because that changes how many units of alcohol are in that wine. So, and I know what it does to my sleep and how I feel. And if I drink several nights in a row, how I feel. So that all sounds like the negative part, but the part I love is that I'm always enjoying wine with food and people. And I don't want to give that up either. So it's 2 to 3 glasses of wine, 3 nights a week for me right now.
And I think it's important that you're calling out, like, for me, and this is what is important to me. Because I think for some people, they're like, well, can I never drink alone then? Is that what you're saying? It's like, no, not at all. Like,
That gives you pleasure. Go for it. I think everybody has an intuition if they just listen to it. Like, is this just because I'm stressed or frustrated, or is this because I love a glass of Chardonnay when I'm watching The Good Wife or whatever? If it's giving you pleasure and you're slowly doing it and you're not just using it as an emotional crutch, go for it. That's another one of the tips in my book that I said, I had to think, what was the thought just before the thought that said, I need a drink? And if it was about stress or frustration or exhaustion, then could I find another way to deal with it? Just a 5-second circuit breaker, like a 5-minute or even a 5-minute walk. I put my hand on my heart just to reconnect, because we're all up in our heads when we're talking that way to ourselves. Get back down, connected to your body, change your energy, go for a walk, have a bath, watch a show, whatever works for you, because often that will diminish that I need a drink in the moment.
yes. No, great call out. I think that's a great way to look at it. And then you can still enjoy wine. I think just, recognizing that it is alcohol. I think the other problem wine has is that it's considered the sophisticated alcohol. So it's like, oh no, I'm fine. I just drink wine. It's like, yeah, that's still alcohol. You still have to treat it as such, as if like you wouldn't have probably 5 cocktails in one night. Maybe not the best
Exactly.
idea to have 5 glasses of wine
It's an
in
easy
one night.
cover, though. Yeah, for
Yeah.
people who do overindulge, it's an easy cover because it looks artisanal and sophisticated. And, you're not doing shooter glasses. Oh, you like your dry farmed, whatever, organic, biodynamic from this small region. And you can cover it up with, connoisseurship, but alcohol is alcohol.
Yeah. And it sure doesn't help that wine bottles are 750 milliliters with like 5
Yeah.
servings each. Like the
Yes.
fact that that hasn't changed very much. I mean, I know it's like very much tradition and just the size of the bottles, and it'd be so much more money to have to bother with smaller, but it's like that is meant to be shared. That size, like, is what I always remind myself. That size is they are assuming you're putting it on a table with at least a few other people. Oh, and one other trick that you said in your book that I thought was good for people to recognize, like, whenever I go out to eat, my husband and I are going somewhere fancy, I love to get a bottle of wine instead of a glass because, like, you have so many more options. But it's like, do we need to finish that? That's always my concern is like, if we're ordering this, we should finish it because it's like expensive. And I know laws are slightly different based on where you are, but I think most places in the US, as long as they have the type of license, you can just ask them to put a cork in it and you can
Yeah.
take the rest home.
Same in Canada, almost always. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can take it home with you. And as
So
long
you
as you
don't
put
have
it
to
in the
drink it
trunk.
all.
No, you don't have to drink it all. You might want to believe that you have to drink it all. And the other thing is too, like sometimes, we'll share a bottle and maybe there's like, I don't know, 2 or 3 inches left. It's a nice gesture too to your server or your sommelier to say, I'd like you to, please do try this. Like we're not taking it with us. So it could be a nice little parting gesture as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's great advice too. I like it.
Yeah.
All right. So I do want to go into one last little topic before we get to our speed round. And it's talking about, again, going back to those professional attacks that you dealt with. And one thing which is sad that I was like, of course this happened. Like I wasn't surprised, but it was also just like, was the amount of misogyny and just calling out different things about your looks and who you are as a woman. And it was like, okay, you can be mad about whatever happened, but that's exactly when it goes into bullying and is ridiculous that that is still as common as it is. And so many people joined in. This happened in 2012. Do you
Hmm.
think there's been a lot that's happened since then, right? We had the
Yes.
2020 big article that came out, and a lot of women spoke up in the wine world. 2024 now, do you think
Mhm.
much has changed since then?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
So, although the events took place in 2012 in this book, I think the themes and issues are more relevant today. I think they might be more subtle, more underground in some circumstances, but it still persists. So you alluded to this. So what happened back in 2012 was before Harvey Weinstein, Me Too, all the rest of it. And you alluded to the newspaper article, the New York Times published a scathing expose, multi-pages in 2020 about the Court of Master Sommeliers. All the top-notch people in that had to resign. There's been studies, 89% of those in the hospitality industry in the UK, 89% of women have been harassed. The stats just go on in terms of more recent things. And so things have changed. We're more aware of the issues. There are more support groups for women and others in the industry, but I think the issues still exist, and we still need to keep telling stories, not have the pendulum swing the other way in reaction to that, and just to support women and others. There's other marginalized groups, of course, not just women. So I think still a lot
Yeah.
needs to be done. Yeah. So,
Yeah. I mean, it's not going to change in 12 years, right? Like, that's
sadly, no.
obviously, we wish.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, if we're thinking about it, so there was a question that you asked Karen McNeil, writer of the Wine Bible, on your podcast, and I wanted to turn it over to you, which is, what would you advise young women entering the wine industry?
Yeah. I asked her because I was really asking for myself. And I really loved what she advised, which was to be ambitious, to be professional. And then she said, I can't tell you how many business cards I get from women in the industry who call themselves wine chicks, wine goddesses, wine divas, wine dolls. And I'm thinking, the signature of my email address at the time was Chief of Wine Happiness, because we're always supposed to be sunshine. And then the book is Wine Witch on Fire. And so I asked her, well, as women, can we help make wine more accessible by, with these kinds of, with this self-deprecating humor is what I called it. And she said, no, not unless you're already in the position of power,
Mm.
which was a good point, because we don't see these monikers for men like harvest hunks and wine warlocks and stainless steel studs. They just don't do it generally. I haven't seen it. But I also think that while language can marginalize and we have to think about what we're doing and the words we use, I think language can also reclaim some lost meaning. And I'm referring to the word witch, because the old narrative was good old witches, hags, green warts, black cat, etc., which really was an allusion to single women who are older in the days of the Salem witch trials. And but for me, a witch today, and we've got that new movie coming out, Wicked, is a wise woman who has been through the flames of life and comes out on the other side stronger, fiercer, wiser.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a place for certain words if you're trying to reclaim what they used to mean
Yeah.
rather than diminishing yourself or others.
Yeah. I read that advice and I was definitely torn because I was like, I never want to put down a woman who wants to use that terminology, like you said, to be approachable. And I also like, I kind of took a little offense because I'm like, oh crap, I laugh a lot. Like you talked about how, like, you're like, what did you call it? Like the chuckle something about like,
Chucklehead, yes, laughing
yes,
after every sentence. It's almost like
yes,
to soften any opinion. You don't want to say it's this way,
yes,
period. You got to go. It's hard not to. We're taught to be caregivers and conciliatory as women. It's really hard. It's a lot of social conditioning. And it
yeah,
doesn't mean we have to be nasty and whatever, but it's just own, I hate to use cliches, but owning your power, standing up for what's right, standing up for others, being strong, and not backing off just because You're afraid of taking up too much space.
Yes, I think that was one thing that like if I were to reword it to me, it would be like take up your space. Like be like this is mine. This is like I made it here. Like whenever it's like when you're starting to feel that imposter syndrome, if you're feeling like, like sometimes I'll feel like, "Oh, do I know enough about wine to be really telling people this?" And it's like, "Yes, you do. Take up that space.
Hmm.
People want to listen to you. People want to hear from you. Have that space." And I think to me, whether I completely agree with like terminology making a difference, I definitely think that like taking up that space and owning it in your way is
Yeah,
so important.
absolutely.
All right. So what's next for you before we get to our speed round?
I am really loving teaching the online food and wine pairing courses at my site, nataliemaclean.com. I am toying around with another book, but it won't be for a couple years. I need to enjoy life because I kind of put things on hold when I write a book. I kind of dive all in for it, and then you have to come out on the other side and help the publisher market it. So it's quite a commitment to write a book, but fortunately, these three have been worth it in terms of, I think, reaching wine lovers, but also in the case of Wine Witch, going a little bit farther than that, because some of the highest or best reviews that I've received are from teetotalers. Don't drink it all and still resonated with it. So that
Wow.
means a lot to me. Yeah. And well, I have to share one note, like with you, changing the names, of course. This woman emailed me and she said, "This is John's wife. We lost our son during COVID. He was 21 years old. He took his own life. And John started drinking really hard. And he read your book. And I do believe it's a big part of why he's now backed off on the drinking."
Wow.
So that just, those kinds
Yeah,
of
that's such
notes.
an impact.
Yeah, it still gives me goosebumps when they talk about it. It's like, woof. So, if you're trying to, it's one of the questions I ask in the book. Do I bring more pleasure or pain in the world when you're writing about something that some people can abuse? Where's the line as someone who advocates for it or writes about it? And I think you just have to balance all of those things
Yeah.
when you are a communicator. So what's next? I mean, just the courses, the website. I do have a free pairing guide on my website for people who want wine and food pairing guidelines that is free. What else is coming up? Some travel, that kind of thing. But right now I'm in the thick of holiday wines and spirits on
Yeah.
TV segments and articles and that kind of thing.
Oh, very fun. Yes, I will also have that free food and wine guide linked in the show notes for people to find and just your website. They'll be able to find it. Anybody listening, you'll be able to find it there as well.
If they find it difficult to spell nataliemaclean.com, because there's all kinds of ways you can spell it, you can also just go to winewitchonfire.com and it'll redirect to my website. So
Okay.
winewitchonfire.com.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So, the end of every podcast, I always like to do what I call this little speed round. And it's just some fun questions. I call it a speed round, not because like I'm expecting you to rapid fire answer these, but more like the questions you could ponder them forever. So, we're mainly looking for like, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Doesn't have to be a perfect answer. All right.
Okay.
Okay. So, the first one is what is your favorite wine at the moment?
Pinot Noir, all kinds of them, like different labels. And I love Pinot Noir. I mean, I start off the book with kind of my own label, Domaine MacLean, and it's Pinot Noir, the heartbreak grape, right? Because it's so difficult to make and expensive for the self-described pathological optimists, winemakers who actually make it. But I love Pinot Noir from cool climates like Niagara, like Carneros, like Oregon, Burgundy, of course, but I don't have a trust fund because it has this nervy, edgy acidity. And it always seems to be sort of quivering on the edge of a nervous breakdown as a grape. And so if I were to go to a party and Cabernet Sauvignon in its suit was standing over there, very calm, very relaxed, I would head over to the corner where Pinot Noir is starting to cry because it would be so much more interesting to talk to Pinot Noir, I think. It just has this world of flavor. And when it's great, it's sublime. When it's bad, it's terrible. But of course, you don't have to drink it.
Yeah.
But it's just so interesting. That's why I
Oh,
love Pinot.
great, great answer. That was so fun. Okay, how about a favorite wine region that you've ever visited?
Think I'm going to have to go with Canadian wine region. The Okanagan Valley, just above you folks to the north, is beautiful. It's stark. It's got, these mountains that plunge down into the Okanagan Lake, and the terraced vines sort of rest on those hillsides. And it's just so beautiful. It's got the mountain air, crystalline lakes, and then you can go and just indulge your senses because a lot of the wineries have restaurants and there's other things to do like biking and ballooning and spas and all sorts of things. But it's just beautiful, beautiful wine country and gorgeous wines you get a 30% discount as an American given the exchange rate. So the wine
True.
incredibly priced for you.
Yes, it has been on my list like ever since after my trips to Walla Walla. And now I'm like, okay, my husband and I went to France this September, and that was like my dream trip, to get out there. And now I'm like, we got to get to Okanagan. It's so close. And every time I hear about it, it just looks beautiful. I've had a few wines, and every wine I've had has been delicious from there. So I'm going
Yeah,
to
you must
put it a little higher on the list, make it bolder, bigger. I don't know. I don't think it can get any more noticeable on the list. Okay, the flip side of that, how about a wine region you'd like to visit?
I think the Dalmatian coast.
Oh,
I'm a fan of Croatian wines, and I heard it's a beautiful place to visit. Again, the scenery and the experience and the food, but the wines I've tasted are terrific. We don't get lots and lots of them in Canada. So I review wines from around the world, not just Canadian wines, but, of course,
yeah.
we get lots and lots of American wines from California, Washington, Oregon, and even other states, and then from countries in Europe and Australia, New Zealand. But so despite the fact we don't get a lot, the ones I've tasted, like you for the Okanagan, I've really, really enjoyed. So that always makes me want to go to the place, and I haven't been there yet.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you have connections, but I do know somebody. There was actually somebody who went on my Walla Walla retreat recently that runs a wine tourism and food and wine cruise business in Croatia. So if you ever want connections there, let me know. She was also on the podcast. She has there's an older episode with her. Her name's
I'll have to
Jennifer.
listen.
Yeah. Yeah. She talks about, a lot of the grapes that like you only find in Croatia. It's another one of those regions that like they have really, really cool, unique wines. So good call out. Okay. This one's probably a hard one. Your favorite wine and food pairing?
I think I would go with a dry rosé and ketchup chips. I don't know if ketchup chips are in the US, if they're a thing. They're certainly a thing here in Canada. But I thought, like, I'm very scientific, of course, when I test food and wine pairings. So I thought with ketchup on its own, like as a sauce, has more sugar per volume than ice cream. It's loaded with sugar and salt. That's why we love it. So I thought ketchup chips, I'm going to need an off dry or I don't know, maybe a sweet wine to go with ketchup chips. But the way they make the ketchup chips here, at least, is they're more savory, almost like they have a sort of sun-dried tomato kind of taste to them. They don't taste sweet, and it might be all that salt. My mouth is starting to water just talking about this. So it was amazing how well a dry rosé went with the ketchup chips. I just absolutely loved it. The sweet wines were too sweet and so on. So after much research, that's what I've concluded is one of my all-time favorite pairings.
Oh, that's a good one. I'll have to get our hands on some. Maybe when I go to the Okanagan, I'll bring back ketchup chips for everybody to try.
There you go. Contraband.
Yeah,
See
exactly.
if we can pass the border.
Yeah. It's important. It's for research, okay?
Exactly.
I love it. Okay. Last question. What is a wine that surprised you lately?
Can it be a category of wines? I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, skin fermented white wines. And there's some funky, weird stuff out there, but the ones I've absolutely loved are distinctive in that they have an aroma of tea, like sometimes Earl Grey tea, sometimes other tea. And again, this is subjective. You don't have to get this weirdly specific when you're tasting them, but I love tea. And so because I'm also a super taster, which just means I'm more sensitive, have more taste buds. I don't like coffee. I don't like strong tastes. So skin fermented white wines that have that sort of tea and these sort of sometimes nutty flavors to me are glorious because they have more flavor often than some regular white wines, but they're not bitter. So it's just this weird connection that I love in the skin fermented whites.
It's such a fun thing to call out. Next time I have a orange wine that's skin fermented, I'll have to see if I
Yeah.
notice tea, because I am a big lover of tea as well. I also don't drink coffee. I don't know if it's because the taste or so much my digestive system is like, heck no to the coffee. We're not going to do that.
Yeah,
But I'm
absolutely.
also mostly a tea drinker as well. So I'll have to see if I find tea aromas in my orange wine.
Yeah, give it a
Cool.
try.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. It's been a wonderful interview. And like I said, it was really special to get to read, your memoir and learn more about you, and then get to do this interview and dive even more into it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Haley, this is great. You're a terrific interview. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for reading the book. And I've been so impressed with you. Of course, I interviewed you on my
Yes.
podcast. So I can't wait to share that with my listeners, and your listeners can find more about you there and vice versa. But I've really enjoyed these conversations. Terrific.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. You can find all of Natalie's books on Amazon or likely at your local bookstore. You can learn more about Natalie and find her free wine and food pairing guide on her website at www.nataliemaclean.com. Her last name is spelled MacLean, Maclean. If that helps, I will also have these links in the show notes so you don't have to figure it out just from listening to me. But just in case you want to go look it up right now and you don't even want to have to stop the podcast to go find out. So nataliemaclean.com. And if you love this episode as much as I did, I'd love it if you could take a quick second. I know I say this every time, but if you haven't done this yet, I would really appreciate it if you could rate the podcast. So either go on your app if you're listening on Spotify, Apple. I'm sure there's other ones. Those are my two go-tos. There's usually a spot to rate the podcast out of 5 stars. I would really appreciate it if you could put a rating there. And if you are on Apple Podcasts, you can write a review of the podcast. I would just love to know, why do you like listening in? What was your favorite episode? What do you enjoy about this? It can just be one sentence. It would really mean a lot to me. And if you know a wine lover in your life that would enjoy this, please share it with them. In next week's episode, we'll be talking about a wine that I don't think a lot of people actually realize is a wine. I know that sounds kind of crazy. We're going to be talking about vermouth, and not just as an ingredient in a martini. There are so many different types of vermouth, and it's a really interesting, unique style of, yes, it is a wine. So that is what next episode is going to be all about. Thanks again for listening, and if you want to learn more about wine, come follow me at Cork and Fizz on Instagram. And if you're interested in exploring new wines and joining an incredible community of wine lovers, be sure to sign up for my virtual tasting club, The Cork Crew. Head to corkandfizz.com/free class pass to come check out a tasting for free. Cheers!